And so we really did a comparative look between her dissertation time in 2002 throughout 2020. And then my fellowship started in 2017. And then in 2017, we had Zhou Xuan was here in the US, and she did some research here we did together. And then in 2018, I actually went to China. I lived in China for 5 months, and I traveled around and collected my research. So let me just tell you a little bit about the research that we were doing. So this was a multi-year, multi-phase project. And so our goal was really looking at the current state of education and employment for individuals who are deaf. And so we did a qualitative study in the US between 5 schools for the deaf, and then a qualitative study in China. And the original project was going to have 5 comparison schools in China. I ended up going to 9 comparison schools in China. And so I'll talk to you about that here in just a minute. So my research question was, what are the similarities and differences in education and employment opportunities between the United States and China for people who are deaf? And so, as I said before, we had 2 phases. So this was a longitudinal report, longitudinal study. We had 2 phases. The first phase, Dr. Zhou Xuan was a visiting professor at St. State University. She came and she did classroom observation. She did individual interviews at 5 schools for the deaf. And then the next year, I did the same project in China. I was a visiting professor at Chongqing Normal University. And that's in the middle of China, and I have a map, so I'll be able to show you that here in just a minute. So now I have a map of the United States up on the slide, and the states that are colored are the ones that we actually collected data. So Minnesota, Iowa, Arkansas, Texas. And then we also had Delaware on the East Coast, and then California School for the Deaf on the West Coast. And so what we were really trying to do is geographically have a really nice sample of students from all geographic regions. So we had the North, the Midwest, the South, the East, and the West. So this gave us a really good idea of what students' experiences were in schools for the deaf. We tried to use schools for the deaf that we had really good partnerships with in the past. And so we were able to have Zhou Xuan go to those schools for 2 weeks, not only do presentations with the students, but interview the students, interview interpreters, teachers, parents, superintendents, asking them about their experiences, but also asking about curriculum, looking at philosophy of education, and looking at educational outcomes, and then what kind of services do they provide for students for transition to employment. And so those are the kinds of things that we were looking for. So this map might look a little small, but so these are the areas that I was in China where I collected my research. So in China, they have provinces, and this is the sign for a province, like this. This is a sign for a province. So they, each one of those colored areas is a different province. So the one right in the middle that's yellow is Chongqing, and that was my home base. I did a lot of research, mostly on the east side. The furthest west I went was Chongqing. I went to Chengdu, but I didn't actually collect data. I did visit a school there, but I did not collect data. And so as you can see, there's a huge disparity in being able to know what is happening in the west of China. So it's really hard to compare because the west of China is their education and employment outcomes are so different from people who live in the east side, especially around Beijing area, Shanghai. The other thing is we also went to Hong Kong. I didn't collect data there, but we saw some really great projects that were happening in Hong Kong. And maybe I'll have time to get to them. I'm not really sure because I have a lot to talk about today. So our research participants were administrators. And so, as I said before, we were talking to administrators and we were asking them, what is your school's philosophy for your approach to education? So we really wanted to know what their philosophy was. What was their approach? What was the primary mode of communication that was required by the school? So did they have a manual approach of using sign language? Was there an oral approach to education? What other kinds of communication methods were encouraged or required in the school? And then we wanted to look at not just deaf teachers, but also hearing teachers, because we kind of wanted to look at what was the difference between the philosophy and perspective of hearing teachers in the classroom with deaf kids and then deaf teachers, or they may not be a teacher, but a deaf adult on the school campus. We also talked to parents, and then we were trying to look at interpreters. So are there interpreters at the school? If there are interpreters at the school, what are they used for? How are they used? What opportunities do students have for extracurricular activities to be able to maybe do higher level classes at a public school, or maybe they're participating in sports at a local school? So we were looking at what, and with the interpreters, we were also looking at the quality of interpreters. So this was a lot of work, a lot of interviews that we did over the 2-year period. Some of the similarities that we found between schools in the US and schools in China was that in both places, both countries, schools for the deaf are really shrinking in number. There really is an approach to having students who are deaf go into mainstream schools. And so we see a lot, the number of students at schools for the deaf here in the US are shrinking, and the same is happening also in China. A little bit, we'll talk about differences in a minute, but in addition to China's numbers of students shrinking because they're going to now mainstream public schools, those schools are now being integrated to be more what we would call deaf plus. And so they have the students that are going there might have other disabilities. And then they also are including students with intellectual disabilities, students with autism, that kind of thing. In both countries, we see that the students primarily still had low reading levels, and that was very similar. We also saw that the majority of parents really wanted to send their students to inclusive schools. Parents that we talked to said it was really important for them that their students went to a regular school, a regular public school with other hearing kids. Parents were really concerned about their children not having that social connection with other kids. Also, so very similar, many parents chose oral training for students at a very young age. In China, they have a huge push towards oral rehabilitation, is what they call it. The same as here in the US. And many of you may know, or you may not know, that most deaf kids are born to hearing parents. So about 90% of deaf kids have hearing parents. And so many of those parents, the first people that they come in contact with is a medical doctor, who then refers them to an audiologist, who most of the time will recommend speech training, will recommend an oral approach, may even recommend cochlear implants. So we see that as a similarity between the US and China, that many, many kids are now being implanted with cochlear implants, regardless if it's a good fit for the child, other than just, they just look at hearing loss, and they look at the type of hearing loss. They don't look at anything else in the child, social, emotional. They do not look at any other kind of physical or physiological kinds of fits for the child. Is it possible there's water in here anywhere?
No.
Okay.
You have Ron was looking for some too.
That's okay.
And then
all right. So I'm going to talk about some differences, because there were a lot of differences between the United States and China. So I told you some similarities, and those are probably things that you already know. But some of the differences between the schools for the deaf, when we talk to administrators in the United States, their approach usually was a language-rich environment. So the goal was that sign language, American Sign Language, was used in a language-rich environment. There were a few schools that talked about that their approach was in whatever modality the student, that was best for the student. But primarily in the classrooms, sign language was the teaching method. In China, every school that we researched had an oral teaching approach, and oral training was the only approach. And what would happen is, so a child who is born deaf in China is identified as being deaf, then they would go through oral training. And at the point where they're failing out of school because they're not able to really have the communication access they need, that is at the time when they would go to a school for the deaf, and then they would start using sign language. So as you can imagine, if someone is 7, 8, 9 years old, sometimes older, there was one student that was sent to the school for the deaf at 11 years old and had no language. And so that is many, many years of lost developmental time to develop language. There was one school in Nanjing, and this is the sign for Nanjing. There was a school in Nanjing that they were trying to implement a bilingual, bicultural approach. And they were, there was a grant from Sweden through the Amity Foundation. And they had a deaf teacher and a hearing teacher. And the deaf teacher wasn't like a full teacher, it was a deaf role model, because individuals who are deaf in China do not have opportunities to become an educator. It's just not a possibility for them. But they had this role model of a hearing teacher with a deaf role model in the class. And those kids who went through that 5-year project really flourished, but they didn't have the funding to continue. And so that was the only project that I saw that had, you know, both of those approaches. Do you want to change interpreter? Okay. Another difference in the United States, many students have opportunities for specialized courses or collaborations with other local schools. So if a deaf student is attending, say, Iowa School for the Deaf, and you know they want to maybe study anthropology, or they want to study something that the School for the Deaf cannot offer, that student has the opportunity to go to a local public school and be able to take that course, and take that course with an interpreter. Either the school district would provide the interpreter, or the School for the Deaf would provide the interpreter. So in China, there are no, or very limited, or no opportunities for school collaborations. And I say very little because there were some opportunities for participation with maybe art or competitions, but not really anything for higher level course learning. The other thing that I was really interested in was early childhood programs. And I could not find really any early childhood programs or parent programs other than parents were just, you know, really emphasized from the time they found out their baby was deaf that they had to do oral speech training, which is really expensive. There were several parents who told me that they had to move from the city that they were in to a place where their child could get oral speech training, and they had really hardly any money at all. And it was really such a burden on the family, but they would do it, and they would get money from other family members as well, just so that they could try to provide that support to the child. So then it was very disappointing for them once doctors were like, yes, they'll be able to speak, you have to be committed to this training, and then their child never really became successful. So for them, that was really, you know, they invested a lot of money, a lot of time, moved away from family support, and then, you know, did not see success in the child. I remember one parent that I interviewed with that was really distraught because she was so frustrated. Her child was 7 years old when they told her that he would not be able to be successful in the oral method and he needed to attend a school for the deaf. And that meant she had to move again. And she had very limited funds. And so this has really put a big strain on her and her family. And she actually had to leave her husband and other children in one city and move to this other city to be with her son. And of course, we wouldn't have that happen here in the US. One of the other things is my colleague, Zhou and I were really interested in what was happening with deaf blind individuals, because we know that here in the US, there's been a big push for services for deaf blind. There have been a lot more interventions of providing interveners, providing tactile ASL, and people who are deaf blind can go into any field just like others. Many of you know Haben Girma, who is a lawyer, and she's deaf blind, right? So if you have the right resources and you have the right access, then you can have access to education. In China, in all of China, all of the provinces that I went to, the 9 different provinces, I only found one person who was deafblind. It was really interesting. And she was able to go to an inclusive mainstream classroom, but inclusion for her was that her mom had to go with her. And she was able to sit in the classroom, but she did not participate. So we use this analogy a lot with disability rights, saying, you know, we don't only want a seat at the table, we want to be a participant at the table. We want to be able to be decision makers at the table. And for her, in that inclusive classroom, she just had a seat and everything was happening around her, to her, for her, but not with her. And so that is something that my colleague Zhou is still doing a lot of research on and trying to figure out where are these individuals, because they're not in school. So they're likely being likely hidden. We're not really sure. Also, another big difference is deaf role models, deaf administrators, deaf teachers, deaf staff, deaf leaders, to develop language and to develop self-efficacy. If anyone knows about Bandura and Bandura's research, talks a lot about self-efficacy. And self-efficacy really is developed by having those, there's a lot of different factors, but one of the factors is having role models that you can look up to, that you have someone that you can look up to. If I asked each one of you, you probably had someone in your life when you were young that you looked up to and you were like, wow, I want to be like that person one day, or wow. Deaf kids most often are not afforded the opportunity to have those deaf role models. Even here in the US, probably 20 years ago, most of the administrators, most of the teachers were all hearing. Now you're starting to see more deaf individuals become administrators. You're starting to have more deaf teachers. There have always been deaf staff, people in the dorm rooms who are deaf. And that's where a lot of the role models have been for deaf kids in the US. But in China, at except for 2 schools, every school that I went to, there were no deaf adults. There were 2 schools where they had art teachers who were deaf. And that was it. And so kids did sign with each other, not out in the playground. I did not see kids signing with each other or at lunch, but I know that when I would ask them, they did sign with each other in the dorm areas or things like that. There were a couple students that I interviewed and asked them if they hung out with other deaf kids when they went home. And every single student I asked that question to said no, that all of their friends were hearing friends in the neighborhood. So I thought that was really interesting too. Another thing that was a really big difference in our research that we were really surprised about is that in the United States, to work in deaf education, you have to have a degree in deaf education. And it's a teaching degree, a bachelor's degree, plus a master's in deaf education. Or sometimes they'll have some special education, but you have to have several years or several classes of sign language. That's not to say that every teacher in a school for the deaf is completely fluent in American Sign Language. There absolutely has been teachers that I've met that I've thought, your sign language skills are not, fluent enough to be in a classroom, but, they still worked at a school for the deaf. But in China, the teachers who worked at schools for the deaf were special education teachers, or sometimes just regular teachers, and they were just assigned to a school for the deaf. They had no idea, they'd never met a deaf person before. They just show up and say, this is my assignment, and they had to figure out, how do I teach deaf kids? And so that's why there's such a strong oral method, because there are not, that I had found at that time, there were not any deaf education academic programs in China. As I said before, in the United States, classes are mostly taught in American Sign Language. In China, they're taught in spoken Chinese. Really interesting of how the classes were taught. And then looking at grammar, a lot of the schools for the deaf now in the US are having ASL classes for students to learn ASL grammar. Not every school. So I think of the schools that we went to, there were only 3 that had an actual ASL class in the United States. The other 2 did not. But that is a trend that is happening in the US, is teaching deaf children about the grammar of their language. But that is new. That is a new trend. English grammar is still primarily what's taught to deaf kids in the US. In China, it only is Chinese. So there's no sign language at all. But it's really funny. There's one school that I went to in Beijing that they were teaching kids American Sign Language, but they had not taught Chinese Sign Language. So I just thought that was really interesting that they were trying to teach them English using American Sign Language, but they didn't use Chinese Sign Language. They had an oral approach to education. So that was really interesting to me. In the United States, of course, we have transition services for kids, right? Because we have laws that require that we start providing transition services at the age of 14. And so every school for the deaf does have some kind of transition program, providing vocational kinds of information, starting at age 14, even providing some shadowing experiences. And in China, There was only one school that I found that did anything like that. It was a school in Zhou, which happens to be Zhengshuan, same sign. So in Zhou, that area, there's a school in which they collaborate with the university. And there's a museum called the Museum of the Silent. And it is the artwork of all the deaf individuals from the university, but also they target the school to have students come to the university so then that they can show their work in this art museum. That was the only kind of vocational occupational thing that I could find. I should stop to ask if people have questions before I go to my last differences. It's interesting. It's really interesting to people. Okay. The interpreters are like, yeah, this is really interesting to me. This doesn't not go when I tell it to go. Okay. All right, some more differences, and then we're going to do a summary, and then I'll show you some of the outcomes of the fellowship project and how we've been able to take what we've learned and start to try to build capacity. So again, one of the major differences was really focused around the sign language interpreters. Sorry, I have vocal cord dystonia, so I can feel my vocal cords starting to spasm. In the United States, if you go to a school for the deaf, there are always qualified, certified, nationally certified interpreters that are provided for faculty, for staff, for students. And students have opportunities to collaborate, take classes at other schools, participate in sports programs of local schools. But in China, there are no there's no certification for interpreters. And there are no qualified interpreters that are offered at schools for the deaf. And so students don't have the opportunities to participate in other higher education or extracurricular activities. So among the 9 schools or the 9 provinces, there were 3 interpreters that I found to interview. I think about that, 9 provinces. We're talking about millions of people, right? There were 3 interpreters, and these were the 3 interpreters that I found that I interviewed were the interpreters that were told to me that in the province, they were the good interpreters. And so I had conversations with them about, you know, how did they develop their skills? Well, all of them developed their skills from being around other deaf people, being in the deaf community. Ironically, none of them were codas, and a coda is a child of a deaf adult. None of them were codas, but all of them had some training at a university, but had really connected with deaf community. Sherry, you have a question?
One of the participants want to know, in the 9 provinces, only 3 interpreters? Seriously?
There were probably more than 3 interpreters, but there were only 3 that were actively working. Yeah, there were other interpreters that were not working, or they had marginal skills. So I was asking deaf, yeah, 3
formally.
Yeah, 3 formal interpreters. Okay.
Thank you.
And then of those 3 interpreters, only one of them worked full time as an interpreter. And that was the person in Shanghai. The other 2 worked half-time. Shanghai. Yeah. So the other 2 interpreters, one was in Chongqing, like a mountain, and then the other one was in Zhou. And so they really taught. It was, I did not. Xiaorong is saying in Hangzhou they have interpreters. Yes, but I did not go to Hangzhou. I was not I'm not talking about education training programs. I'm talking about interpreters I interviewed.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. And I did not go to Hangzhou. I did not go to Hangzhou to interview anyone. I wasn't in Hangzhou. But the 3 interpreters that I did interview, there was just, it was a very emotional interviews. All 3 of them are just very emotional interviews where they felt like they had all this weight of the community on them. And there were so many ethical issues that came up, and they didn't have a network to be able to talk with other interpreters, to be able to talk about how do you deal with this ethical issue, or how do you, how does this happen? And they just felt they were, just felt like they didn't have support. And so you may or may not know, I mean, being just working as an interpreter takes extreme amount of knowledge. It takes an extreme amount of energy and collaboration, because you're not interpreting for the deaf person. You're interpreting for the situation, whoever's in there. So if you have the hearing person, the deaf person, parents, whoever is in there. So you're interpreting whatever is happening in the situation. And so it was a lot of stress for them. In the US, interpreters it wasn't the same kind of interview. They were felt they had a lot of support. Interpreters at the school, that they're all nationally certified. So they had opportunities for professional development. And so that was a really big difference. The other really big difference, and I should check the time, because I don't have the time on my screen. So if someone can.
8:46 right now.
Oh, 15 minutes. The other really big difference is that students who are deaf didn't have opportunities to do any other career, as Xiaorong was saying yesterday. So no other career other than art and, some kind of technology. And so asking them, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? It was hard for them to even have, a visual or a passion or of what they wanted to do. It was like, I'll do art, or I'll do computers, because that's all that they were told that they could do. And so that was really difficult to have those conversations. I will say, however, though, Kathy and I at another time met with some college students at Chengchun University. That's in Jilin province, Jilin province, northern China. And those deaf students really talked about wanting to be psychologists, or, wanting to work as a teacher, or wanting to work, as in sports, or all these different areas. And I do have a video to show you. So I'm going to try to go through this next couple slides really quick. But the outcome of all of this that we learned, where there was a disparity in language, big difference between language, modality, quality of education, lack of leadership for deaf students in China, and communication access. So no communication access. So this is really what we've been focusing on from the end of the fellowship, of how can we build capacity to address these areas. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that we have done as a team, and it's not things that I've done by myself. Even through my fellowship project, it's been Dr. Johnson and I, basically her contacts, that has helped me to get into China and to do this work and to be able to apply for the fellowship. So I'm really thankful for that. But some of the things that we were able to do is in 2018, we took a delegation of deaf professionals. We had 2 conferences planned. By the time we landed and people found out that we were going to be there, we had 6 conferences that we ended up doing. I mean, just conferences, spot on conferences. And I'll just say we had really high level deaf professionals with us, and I'll just recognize one person. We had Leah Katz Hernandez. And if you don't know who she is, she was the special advisor.
She was the receptionist.
She was the receptionist for the office of the President of the United States. So she worked for Obama and she was his receptionist. And she was with us. So we had some really high level deaf people with us on that delegation. It was amazing. In 2019, we took another delegation of deaf individuals and we really were focused on sign language development. And so we spent some time in Zhou, and there's only one video relay service in China. And so, but there's not enough interpreters. And so that's one company that we've been working with. Here's some other things that we have done. We have been working with the Beijing Normal University National Chinese Sign Language Research Center. So they just developed a dictionary. It was developed by hearing people. And so the deaf community are kind of developing their own thing. There's a little bit of, you know, lack of collaboration, I think, between some of the professionals. But we did a lot of work with Beijing Normal, and now my colleague Zhou does work at Beijing Normal. The video relay company that I talked about is partnering with Sorensen VRS. And so we were able to bring some Sorensen interpreters there to provide training to them to visit their center. And so that was really amazing. We also were able to do a panel of deaf education and employment, really a big outcome of the work that Kathy has done and that I did through my fellowship at the U.S. Embassy. That was amazing. We had standing room only of deaf individuals in that room, 300 people. It was just amazing the amount of people who came to that presentation. We also did another forum. These are some of the conferences we did with the Deaf Professional Group. A conference, we did the China Annual Conference, Casey Conference. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that, but they're a conference for international education. And Kathy and I were able to talk with them for the first time to include inclusive education. So I don't know if your office, Hannah, if you've ever participated in the International Education Casey Conference, but there's 10,000 people who go to that conference, and there must have been 2,000 schools they have a big expo where schools are really doing a lot of recruiting. But it was the first time that we were able to do an inclusive education conference during the conference. So we had a separate track. And really just, it was amazing. We've done that for a few years until COVID happened. And then the biggest outcome of that is we were able to find Zhou Xiaorong to come to the US to start to develop deaf education, Chinese Sign Language curriculum for schools in the deaf. So one of the things that I was really passionate about, Kathy and Zhou as well, is that students in both China and the US need to develop global competencies. And so by bringing deaf individuals to the School for the Deaf, they have an opportunity to now learn a second language, right? We, as our hearing kids get to learn second languages, why aren't our deaf kids able to learn second languages? And so at our 5 pilot schools, we chose 3 of them: Delaware School for the Deaf, Iowa School for the Deaf here in the great state of Iowa, and Minnesota State Academies for the Deaf. And we had interns who are deaf who came for 1 year to teach Chinese Sign Language, Chinese culture, and it was amazing. Unfortunately, COVID happened, but they still were able to do their pilot virtually. And we're very lucky that Xiaorong has been able to stay with us. And so a couple of the things that we're working on now is continuing that School for the Deaf project. And so we have 10 students that Xiaorong talked about yesterday that are approved to come. We have a grant to do Chinese Sign Language interpreter training to work with 3 universities in China to help them standardize their curriculum. And then we just developed a graduate certificate in deaf leadership and advocacy. And so the students coming from China would do a semester of leadership classes and then do their internship teaching Chinese Sign Language in schools for the deaf. And I just, I know that time is probably gone now, but I do have a little video that I want to show. It's 8 minutes long, but I want to let you know that this has been for Kathy 22 years of working in China. Now for me, 10 years of working in China. It's been the best years of our lives. We love our job, but of course it's not without challenges. And the challenges aren't just funding. Funding is a really big challenge, but we always seem to make a way. But I think the other big challenge is getting through all the red tape of our universities, other universities, you know, visas, all of the red tape that people were talking about yesterday. So we need collaborators. We need the Harkin Institute. We need Drake University. We need other schools, K through 12 schools, because this is bigger than all of us. This is something that St. Cloud State and our center cannot do alone. It's something that will take all of us to work together, pull our resources to say, if we want to really make a difference in China, we really want to see inclusive opportunities for individuals. We all have to do our part and see how can we all work together to do that. I'm going to show you why that we're really passionate about this. Our colleague, Sherry Rademacher, is on this, but I just the way that it's done in the video, I've decided not to ask her to do it in person and just to play the video. So
even though she's sitting right here.
I hope you all can hear it.
My name is Sherry Rademacher. So what exactly is deaf leadership? I'm not only talking about a deaf individual in charge of a business. Deaf leadership can also be internal, developing your skills and abilities, empowering others, motivating others, and collaborating to ensure a better future for deaf communities in countries around the globe. We want to see more countries working together to accomplish this. CDAD is thrilled to have developed courses leading to a deaf leadership advocacy graduate program, where students from different countries have a course of study focused on leadership. We've started the program by teaching ASL to students in China. We've been working remotely twice a week for the last 4 weeks. After learning ASL, those students will then come here and begin taking classes to become leaders for their home country. They'll be developing those skills and learning about how much they can do. What an exciting time. So I'd like to show you a video where they demonstrate their future goals within deaf leadership. And if you'd like more information about CDAD, please reach out to us. We're here and ready to tell you about it. Hello. My name is Ning Chen. I'm from China. Nice to meet you. I love learning ASL, but I haven't learned enough yet. I want to go to America to continue my studies until I've learned it all. I want to take time and meet, collaborate with other deaf people and learn all I can from them about deaf education and deaf culture. Hello, my name is Li Zhou. I'm from Shanghai, China.
The sign for
The
Shanghai.
people here are Mongolian. I am thrilled to be a St. Cloud State University student. After I've completed my studies, I want to return to China to help the deaf community grow. Instead of having deaf people feel like a separated minority, they can be one in society with other hearing individuals. Everyone together in a united society. That's what's important. There's also a worldwide organization that I would like to be a part of. Someday I would like to be a part of the World Federation of the Deaf. Thank you.
Their ASL is amazing. 4 weeks.
Hello. My name is Xinyu Liu, and I'm from China. I'm currently studying at BUU for my BA degree. I love technology and computer repair. Here's why. With technology, there is no limit to the apps and the programs that can be created. I want to learn about and to build with technology. My goal is to later create games and other programs. So I am hoping to go to America next year and earn my graduate degree. Thank you. Hello, my name is Sichi Han. I want to go to America and study deaf education. I want to take that breadth of information of knowledge, bring it back to China, and to teach deaf children. That will give them the support they need to integrate into mainstream society with hearing children. They too can succeed. I want deaf and hearing children's educations to be equal. Thank you. Hello, my name is
After 9. Okay. I'll go to the end.
I'm currently at BUU
I'll just stop
in
it.
China as a student.
And I can send this to everyone because there's a couple more students. But isn't it amazing in 4 weeks that they've learned ASL? These are the students that we're trying to get here. But the project, everything that has come out of the fellowship has really been amazing. And it's where we are today. And so we know that it will continue to build capacity for deaf education and employment in China. And wow, what an impact just from that small little project. So never
About that was a
Yes.
huge project.
never underestimate, the power of a small group of people who are dedicated and passionate to be able to change the world. I think that was Margaret Mead. Anyway.
Yes.
Right, thank you all. Sorry I didn't have time for questions. We started about 10 minutes late, so I would have had if we started on time.
Well, congratulations. This is just remarkable.
We'll send it to Senator Harkin.
Oh. All right, so I think next we have
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me for my presentation on inclusion and diplomacy. So I'm just going to be sharing my life experience and my research. All right, here we go. So I am from China. I was born in South China in Zhou. And I grew up until I was 20 in China. And I went to Beijing and I lived there for a long time. And now I'm at St. Cloud University in Minnesota doing my fellowship. And I'm developing a curriculum and program about deaf leadership and advocacy. I've got some key terminology for all of you. ASL is American Sign Language, and it's abbreviated ASL. Chinese Sign Language is abbreviated to CSL. Big D, deaf, indicates that it's talking about deaf cultures, deaf culturally significant. And small d, deaf, means it's a medical term, something that is used within a medical terminology to indicate the hearing loss. So just remember those key terms. So this is my family, a few pictures of them. I have a total of 6 siblings. Older sister, then a brother, then another sister, and me, and then a younger brother, and only one deaf sister. That's the second sister deaf. All the rest are hearing. And when I was born, it was about 11 months old, I got sick and had a shot of penicillin. I think that's how you spell it. They gave me penicillin, and then I had hearing loss after that. And my older sister was really excited that she had someone who was the same as her, and started signing together. And she exposed me to sign language, and so we were very close. And that's the 2 of us together at a party in that picture, having some fun and just being in the community together. And CSL is my first language, just so everyone knows. And my family is hearing, and so what we did to communicate with them is write back and forth. Tell me when you're ready to go. My language skills, like I said, CSL is my first language, Chinese Sign Language. And the other language, second language, is ASL, American Sign Language, English, and a little bit of Korean Sign Language. So I've been learning all of these languages because I really just love language. I really get into it, and I really enjoy studying language. And yeah, I just really enjoy talking. And this picture is an interpreter. They didn't know, I didn't know ASL very much, and they didn't know Chinese Sign Language very much. So we were interacting and learning each other's languages. So I went to an elementary school that was a deaf school. So everyone there was deaf. There were about 400 kids in the school. All of the teachers were hearing. They could sign pretty well. So we had, we were able to socialize and use sign language at school. Then when I got into middle school, in high school, it was pretty much the same. They were all deaf. The teachers were hearing. There's one deaf teacher, but they taught art. But that was really interesting to have that role model in the arts. I think it was interesting that they taught art and they didn't teach any other subject. But in elementary school, we had grade five. Yeah, I really found out that I love writing. And I love poetry and being able to express myself in writing. And, I saw everyone else doing it as well. I just really enjoyed it. So grade 5, the teacher noticed, hey, I was pretty good. So there was a competition, you could get first or second or third. And, I decided I would enter that. And it was, so I competed with hearing students in that competition. So after the competition, all the results came in and I was in 3rd place, and I was a little upset about it. I was kind of excited, but I told my dad, and I was a little disgruntled about getting 3rd place. And he said, no, that's fine. You did great. I'm proud of you. And my dad's friend, his daughter loved writing as well. And, we got together and we were having some fun, and, hey, they showed him, oh, my daughter got 3rd, showed them the writing. And they were just kind of, oh, that's not pretty, and so it's, my dad was like, no, it's fine. But he said, no, it's just not really at the same level as the hearing students. So my dad kind of was taken aback by that. And And I became embarrassed, and I was embarrassed that, you know, my writing wasn't considered as good as my hearing peer. So, you know, I was just comparing that, getting third place and comparing it to this other girl. It was just really upsetting, and I got, you know, very upset, and just started to compare that and becoming aware of that deficiency. And so I really started learning and studying that so I could get into university. When Zhang, no, I had already been in middle school already, and I was going to high school, and I was wanting to go into high school, and my dad was like, okay. And he called and we found Hangzhou, and found out that we could get into there. And I was very excited. And they said that I was going to have to major in art. That's what I was going to have to learn. And I was very upset by that. You know, I really wanted to study writing. I didn't want to study art. So got ready for university. And there was a big competition. You have to pass some things to get into university. And I passed them. But I was really limited on my options. I had two options. I could either study art or computers. And I really didn't want to do that. I said, you know, I want to go to another school. I want to major in writing. I want to major in language. And my dad said, no, you can't because you're deaf. And that was very frustrating for me. So finally got into university, and I just put up with it, and I studied. And after 4 years, I graduated. But now I was trying to decide, well, what am I going to do? And, you know, there was just really nothing for me to do. I couldn't find any of the options that I was wanting. And I worked for 13 years at a company, and it was hard work, but, you know, everyone else that was there was hearing, and I was the only deaf employee. My coworkers, you know, were fine. They were good, but, you know, the boss just was very, oh, you're very good. You're doing a great job. And the art directors, I said, I want them to do something more. And they said, no, you can't because you're deaf. And they wouldn't give me more projects. They wouldn't give me more assignments. And typically there would be a meeting every Monday, and everyone would be involved, but I'm sitting there with no access. I don't know what's going on. They would write a few things. And honestly, most of the time they say, you know what, you don't really need to know. And so most of the time I was just sitting there bored, and didn't have any opportunities for advancement within the company, and was unable to really stretch or grow in any kind of way. And I could see all of my peers doing that. They were advancing and being able to do more and more things. So finally I decided to quit, and I went to Southern Korea to a graduate program. And it found to be rehabilitation linguistics. Okay, there we go. Sorry, that would have been helpful if I had the slide. Sorry about that. So in this graduate program, we had interpreters, and I had never really experienced that before. So it was really interesting. I was able to communicate with other hearing peers, and it was very interesting and able to do that. I had never experienced that before. I was shocked that we were able to communicate within that group because of the interpreter. And with my first language is Chinese Sign Language, and then I started learning Korean. And they would type up a transcript, and I would be able to read it and study everything that happened in the class. So that was really amazing. That was the first time I'd really had that kind of access. And it really was just opening the door to figuring out, you know, my cultural identity and all those kinds of things. So 3 short years later, I went back to China and decided that I wanted to become a teacher and an advocate. But really, there were so many limitations there. The educational system, it had a lot of limitations. You had to be a certain age, and I was beyond that age to become a teacher. So it was just really, really difficult. So I decided to stay positive. I would set up a business, a company, and with another person, and we decided that we were going to try and do a dev camp for Chinese high school students and bachelor students. And so we didn't really know, everything that we needed. We weren't really sure. Oh, I forgot to move the slide again. Okay, so that's when we set up the business. Okay, yeah. What was I saying? All right, so really we didn't have any interpreter. I had to write back and forth with people again because I was back in China, and I noticed my eyes started hurting. I started getting headaches. So I went into the hospital, and there was no interpreter, no kind of access. It was all written language communication. And people got very, very frustrated with me trying to understand what was going on. And I ended up, I had pneumonia.
Wait.
What?
She's talking about using voice of hands, which is a video relay.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, this is
So I ended up using voice of hands, which is a video relay company. And that was the way that I was able to communicate. There's an interpreter on a screen. And so, they did all of their tests, and I was struggling using the interpreter on the video relay service. So we went back to writing, and, I just had a terrible headache, and they couldn't help me. And I was very frustrated, and I was just having to put up with what was going on, the whole situation. And, and I was,
Compared to my experience here.
compared with my experience here, being pregnant and being in the medical system here, in the health care system here in the US, in China, there's no interpreters available, no communication access. And my family, they weren't helpful because they're just talking, they don't know sign language.
doctor would talk with my family.
And the doctor would talk with my family, they wouldn't talk with me. So I was completely out of everything.
When she was pregnant in China, it was a very different situation.
And that's when I was pregnant in China. It's just very different than what I've experienced here in the US. So, it was very much, I just had to take whatever was going on. I had to take, it was very passive role for me. Everyone else was getting the information and I was not. And so this is just me sitting and thinking and kind of thinking about all of the barriers that I've had to go through in China.
The interpreters did not have certification or training. There was no NAT sign language. It was just there was no curriculum available, no ethics. So this is my second pregnancy was here in the United States, and it was so much more comforting here because, like I said, in China I had no access, but here I did have access all the way through. So, every appointment I had interpreters provided, and I felt, I just enjoyed learning all these specifics about being a mom, and it was overwhelming because they took the time to explain, and I just thoroughly enjoyed the experience compared to my first child.
Kathy Johnson.
Oh, Dr. Kathy Johnson. Um, Dr. Knopf, their work inspired me, encouraged me to
Develop my global competencies.
work on global competencies, and they encouraged me to go out there and try some. Oh, we created the Zero Project Deaf Music. That was an international effort, and I thought, well, I could participate in this, and so I reached out to several different countries that to see if I could participate, just to show the different languages all over the world, and encourage participation to create or just be successful with the Zero Project. So I got the opportunity to travel the world, talk with people from different cultures, just learn about the international community. And it was difficult. It was a lot of work, but we won China Rising Star Award. Dr. Kathy Johnson and Dr. Knopf fought for us to get internships, and I was one of them. Got the research fellowship. Without their help, I may have still been in China, and I might not have had the same opportunities. So, yeah, I was thrilled to have the opportunity. And it was so important to have that opportunity to interact. Our CDAD program that recruited us, there were 10 students that came. And as Dr. Knopf just explained.
I'm sorry, she's talking about now our goal is on inclusive diplomacy, and we've recruited 10 students to come in the future.
Right. Should I expand on that anymore? Oh, you're good. Okay. We got involved in, we gave a lot of presentations. I was, of course, very nervous. I was kind of shy, but I received a lot of encouragement, and eventually I got over that and was able to give presentations at various conferences and workshops. I've done it in China, Europe, Dubai, just a number of countries I was able to give those presentations, and just increased my experience, proficiency with that. Sorry. Where was I? Thank you. This is we were able to provide mentors with the American Sign Language mentors, and I with Chinese Sign Language developed a different teaching or presentation, and my research will illuminate that a little further. But if there were mentoring, we didn't have those opportunities. Without them, we would have those opportunities for role models and being as successful. So getting those mentors that we could learn from, and then I would go and share my experience with others. How are we doing on time? Okay. So we would teach language and identity and provided those successful role models so that they could be successful. My focus was on developing a curriculum between Chinese Sign Language and ASL, American Sign Language. So that was my research. The education systems are very different between America and China, as we've already learned. Communication methods in the two countries. Here in the US, children grow up signing and communicating manually. They're able to communicate with their teachers, but in China, unfortunately, there's none of that. It's just sits in the classroom and try and lip read the teacher and struggle to figure out what they're saying. They would use like signing exact English and other forms of communication, but in the United States, it was visual communication. So children were able to interact with their teachers and peers. But in China, we had to learn Chinese grammatically, oral Chinese, and the grammatical structure. Teaching methods in the United States is it's a student-centered approach to education. So whatever the student needs, they're there to accommodate and teach to the student, and that way they're able to draw the student out. They're able to participate in critical thinking, and once they know, whatever their lesson was, they can move on from there. They have IEPs, individual education plans. So each child can able to develop and learn more quickly. So that was part of my research. In China, it was very different. Again, like I said, students sit in rows and they're just lectured to in spoken Chinese. There's no opportunities to engage with the instructional staff. Again, it's an oral communication, gesturing to some degree. And it's more of a teacher-centered program rather than a child-centered program or student-centered. So dramatically different, very interesting. So students in China have a much poorer education. Literacy skills in the United States, the teachers don't force them to read orally. They can tell stories in sign language and American Sign Language. So the children have that opportunity to express themselves in sign language. They don't have to try and listen to it orally and recreate it or expressively. They can do it on their own. They can read books, and if they don't understand, they have those opportunities to, like I said, engage with the instructors, and so they're able to understand material that maybe they don't understand. In China, children are just forced to struggle to read, and again, forced to lip read. Yeah, very different. The curriculum for students in the United States, American Sign Language, got a curriculum several options for teaching English and equivalent programs to what the hearing children have. But in China, they don't have that. It's all, provided, or it's all curriculums designed for hearing children. But in the United States, the curriculum are developed by deaf individuals. And the children then can master ASL, and they can be taught. So they have their curriculums are equal to what the hearing children have. But in China, students should be taught in Chinese Sign Language, but the communication or how they're taught, they're just taught to mimic their instructors. It's just from rote, and they're just having to memorize their education. No opportunities to interact.
So having the equivalency, there's not really in US, there is somewhat of a equivalency for the curriculum, but in China, there's not. It's just very much deficient curriculum. So yeah, I want to develop one that's set up and ready to be used. And so I just explained in my story how in China, I was only given 2 options for my career path. In America, deaf students have many options. They can be whatever they want, engineer, lawyer, whatever, and can go, become anything and become very successful. But in China, they're very limited to art and computer technologies, and that's it. Physical labor, and that's all. So those are the only options that are provided to deaf people in China. And you can see there, that's an engineering student, or engineering class, and they're in there, and it's an equivalent experience, and they're able to learn. And in China, in high school, middle school, you start focusing on art because you start preparing for what you're going to be learning in university. So it's already ingrained in you that this is going to be your option. And you don't really, there's not, it's pretty abstract, but it's very laid out path for you. And the US, it's very different. Like, you get a lot of exposure to a lot of different options. You're very independent and able to pick anything that you would like. So kind of jumping back, the way I had explained about these, this is pictures of the interns. And I already went over some of this stuff. But these are some successes, the CDAD program. Why did we establish that? Well, this is why we wanted to get those connections. We wanted to get people connected into this and be able to have those opportunities. And then the Zero project, being able to partner with people all over the world, getting deaf Chinese interns to be able to come over to the United States. And then American deaf students learning CSL in TID at NTID and National Technology Institute for Deaf, and being able to teach CSL as a second language there. And the American students, they loved it. They thought it was amazing to be able to learn CSL. And, they already have ASL, and then to be able to apply it in a different way and learn a different language was amazing. And I think other deaf schools are interested and want to start a program like that as well. So that is going on within the deaf schools here in the US. We're looking into some cultural exchange. Oh, can I have a time check? Oh.
Oh, and you guys.
Okay, this is an intern in one. Mike. It studied Mike. Oh, Mike. So he was an intern for a year. He studied ASL and taught CSL. So then he was involved in the CDAD program and really gained a lot of self-confidence and went back home and decided to do this. And I'm going to show a video that shows his story. Oh, does it have?
That's okay.
Voice or I don't know. Do I need to sign it or what do I need to do?
Yes, Guangzhou.
Guangzhou. So this is in Guangzhou. And this is the deaf, there's a deaf competition. They were assigning and he won first place. So that's his dad talking about difficulties with communication, and in the past they had some issues. And so now dad has more of an understanding and it's a more peaceful relationship because they can understand each other better. And the dad says, that he worked really hard. And in China that it's not easy. And he's happy and proud of his son. And this is showing the award. He's showing the award and how he's so proud of it and how he loves English. And this is when he was hearing, or when he was younger, he was mainstreamed and had a lot of barriers to communication. He was deaf, completely deaf, and couldn't understand anything. And now he's saying how much he loves English and that he didn't understand teachers when he was younger. He didn't understand what they meant. And so he wanted to understand English. He wanted to understand, but there were no interpreters. And at school, they helped him study and learn. And that teachers helped his English to improve dramatically. And this is him showing his writing. And, he's just saying he's very happy and he really enjoys it. And he loves writing and reading. And so then he's showing us his qualification piece. And these are his grandparents, grandpa. And that he had the opportunity to go and study in a hearing school. And then he had the university tests. And his grandpa passed away and he was very sad. And that was a very poignant moment for him. And that thing that growing up, it's just talking about the cycle of life from birth to death and how he has to fight and stand up. And that when his grandpa passed away, that really just inspired him and gave him kind of like a sense of purpose going forward. And then this is just having fun, good time in Minnesota. This is a Minnesota School for the Deaf. And then where he was an internship and he studied at St. Cloud University. He's talking about how they helped him. They taught him different methods that helped him gain self-esteem and empowerment. And he's talking about his research. And then that St. Cloud Confucius School Institute, that he went out to different places and got a lot of different experiences through that. Then he graduated with his bachelor's degree. And now he is back in teaching, and the students really love him and they love his teaching. They think he's a great teacher. And he's really helping, encouraging deaf people to really get out there and do things. And so then it's just getting a lot of support and respect and being very positive and enjoying his life now. And people are really appreciating him and his journey. And so, so that he's gone very, very well. And he's learning new things and he's always curious and wanting to study and learn. And now And now this is showing him teaching and teaching everything that he's learned. So that's him teaching again, sign language. Yeah, so this is the news report that was done on.
Oh, I miss him.
Yeah, so like, yeah, he's really proud, you know, we're really proud of him, and he's passing on his gifts. And I know Dr. Kathy Johnson, really, she worked with him a lot. So, you know, I'm thinking about the future, and, you know, I just thinking about never stopping. I just want to keep going. Deaf people all out around the world have so much to offer. You know, we can have lots of different roles. We can provide support, we can advocate, we can be teachers, we can be mentors, we can be lawyers, you know, we can be anything. We can work with anyone. And, you know, there's a lot of power in that, in our, you know, in being visual and people seeing us doing those things. There's a lot of power in that. And nothing about us without us. That's what we're kind of thinking about for the future. We want to be involved, you know, knowledge about our culture, and you know, not letting hearing people make decisions for us. We want to make decisions for ourselves. You know, we don't want people to think of being deaf as being a problem. We want to be like, oh yes, you're just like me, and maybe there are some barriers, but we can resolve those. So I really, you know, we want to be really included and making decisions for ourselves. We really want autonomy and independence. And deaf people do need hearing people's support. We need everybody's support. We work hard, and we will always support you back. It's a reciprocal relationship. So, you know, hearing people don't know ASL, and if we partner together, we can learn. We all can learn. If there's a deaf candidate, talking about deaf gain. Sorry, deaf gain. So the ADA, Americans with Disability Act. So if, you know, we're talking about like fire alarms, having lights for accessibility for people who can't hear, having lights for in water and pools, using sign for, you know, games, like if you need something, you need me, we're just supporting each other and developing that kind of relationship with each other where we can be supportive of each other. And staying positive, keeping a positive mindset is very important. I just want to keep positive. I know, you know, I want to be able to respect people for who they are and always be respectful. And really, most importantly, is just be you. I think that's the most important thing. What's my time?
What we doing?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Last one. So this program, I'm so proud of it. I want to show the program. This is the music video from the 18 different countries. So this is the Zero Project music video. Want to show it? I'm gonna show it. I might need help.
Okay. Oh,
Getting the video to show.
We could find it on.
Let me see.
Can
you help me?
Assistance, please. Yeah.
Where's your cursor?
Maybe she can make you a host, Amy, and you can pull it out.
I got it.
You got it, okay.
Sure. It's here. Sharing.
Okay,
Right?
well, you're on the screen now.
Oh, wait, I gotta reshare again. Which one is share sound? It's in Chinese, so sorry, people. Where is it? I'm gonna just do the test on it. I don't hear it.
You're on camera though, Amy.
I know. Sound. Let's start music until right here.
Education, employment,
No sound.
accessibility, independent living, and political participation, innovative practices, and innovative policies. A network of civil society.
If you see
Okay, there we go. Here we go. Oh, it's not sharing. Is it sharing on the?
Nope.
You see it on the. Okay.
Education, employment, accessibility, independent living, and political participation, innovative practices, and innovative policies. A network of civil society.
If you see me, take me just the way I am. We could change the world because we understand. If we both are part of the same society, I could be me. Zero barriers, zero walls, zero borders, zero bonds, zero limits. By reaching our aim, zero project, the dignity of man.
If you give me chances and take me by the hand, if you let me grow and if you let me be, if we all give up our partiality, then I could be free.
Zero barriers, zero walls, zero borders, zero bonds, zero limits. Reaching our aim, zero project, dignity of man. Innovative practices and innovative policies. A network of civil society.
Oh, there.
Get the camera back on.
Please. Camera's not on. Oh, it's straight up.
Okay, so that video is just my favorite. I absolutely love it. It's so diverse and so beautiful. That's really inspirational. Yeah, I really wanted to get a lot more countries, but we only have 18. So my goal was to get 100 countries from all over the world. I really think that would be beautiful if we could do that. So I guess now we'll open it up for a Q&A if there's any questions from anyone online or in the room.
You mentioned in China that students are limited to art and computers. Have you seen anybody really excel in art? Oh, we need to wait for you to sign that question. Can you repeat that, please? Yes, you mentioned that Chinese students are limited to art and computers. Have you seen deaf students excel at just in art and or computers? Just some examples, please.
That's a good question. Most are art teachers. They become art instructors, but not very successful. It's very hard to become very successful there. It's complicated. And then they do more simple tech things. Typically, that's the jobs that they're placed into. Statistics, so just some more simple technological things. There are a few artists, maybe 10, I think. But yeah, that have gained a little notoriety, but not a lot. Okay, thank you for the question.
Excellent.
All right, well, thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
I know. Or did you just